I think Trump had, it might have been like 3 or 4 lawyers who were arrested. And like we've never seen anything like. Look, I can't speak for the entire country, for the entire history of the country. So it is a bit hyperbolic to say never. I would say in my lifetime, it is shocking and terrifying when the Democrat DOJ starts arresting the lawyers of their political opposition.
What lawyers were arrested?
Jenna Ellis. There was, I think it was 2 lawyers from the Georgia case and 1 in Wisconsin. Jenna Ellis was the most notable because she ultimately ended up pleading guilty to RICO charges, and the RICO charges stemmed from her drafting a letter. Trump solicited her to draft a legal letter to pursue an election challenge. And they argued RICO because Trump's election challenge was a conspiracy to overturn an election. And because she participated, she had committed a crime.
Well, Jenna Ellis wasn't charged by the Fed, so it wasn't.
Right, it was state.
It was by the state. It was state of Georgia. That was Fani Willis's case. And that one was because they charged her with the trying to overturn the election by writing letters and doing all that stuff. That's
lawyers writing letters is a crime now?
Well, it could be, yeah. Lawyers who, like consigliaries for the mafia, have been accused of crimes for many years.
Is it illegal to challenge an election?
It is not illegal to challenge an election through the proper channels, through courts. But what you can't do is, you can't call the Proud Boys to come to the Capitol.
Jenna Ellis didn't do that.
Oh, well, I'm saying in general.
So we can, instead of I'm not here to argue January 6th. I'm arguing specifically the unprecedented action of arresting Trump's lawyers.
Well, if she committed a crime, just because you have a bar card doesn't give you a get out of jail free card. You're charged with. She was charged with 2 felonies, and she actually took a plea.
That's right.
Right, she pled guilty.
Indeed, because
lesser crime.
Pleading guilty always implies the guilty party is guilty, right?
Well, I'm a former prosecutor, so.
Of course not. Well, there's the trial tax and Jenna Ellis's fear that there was no defense apparatus from a legal machine at the state and federal level willing to arrest lawyers. So she cowardly bent the knee and cried on TV and admitted to things when all she did was draft a letter. She wrote a letter for Trump. They charged her with RICO. And the bigger picture, I think, on all of this is show me the man, I'll show you the crime. And that's the ultimate point with the GOP Oversight Committee, with the pardons. We're looking at Letitia James on mortgage fraud now, Adam Schiff on mortgage fraud. And the argument from the other side is Trump is going after his political opponents. And I'm sitting here being like, and they went after him. What's the difference?
But you're talking about Fani Willis in Georgia. That's
Indeed.
Different than, right? That's not Joe Biden. That's not Merrick Garland. You're talking about Jenna Ellis, who the reason why she was prosecuted was because she was participating in lies that Rudy Giuliani made before Senate committees. And so if you lie, if you commit perjury, you're going to get bit for it. And that's why
she wrote a letter. I forgot it was to a politician in Georgia requesting access or something, or challenging the election in some capacity. And this is the most egregious. They argued that, she was charged with specifically RICO, like a felony conspiracy involved in Trump's election schemes. But there was a lawyer in Wisconsin. It's ridiculous, right? So your political opponent, he's the front runner. Whatever the argument is, it is insane that they went after all of Trump's confidants, his staffers, and it does extend to J6, obviously not to anyone who was violent, but criminally charging people who weren't even there and giving them 20 years in prison, or even some of them that were for rioting, as well as people who got hunted down for misdemeanors.
Well, that's where the conspiracy comes in. We talked about that, seditious conspiracy. You didn't have to be there to be part of the conspiracy. I think you're talking about like Enrique Tarrio and people who weren't there on the scene. Right. That's the law.
And so I suppose the issue is we have a lot of laws on the books, and if the Democrats say let's rip precedent and throw it out the window, then Trump's going to respond with, I got a nuclear bomb waiting for you when I win the election.
I think what Merrick Garland, who's criticized by the left for being too timid and too weak, I think what he did was very different than what you're seeing now, where President Trump ordered Pam Bondi to prosecute his enemies, and then Bondi wavered on that. She didn't move forward on that because she's an experienced prosecutor. But then so Trump said, all right, I'm going to fire Eric Siebert, the acting U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, because I don't like what he told me. He says there's not enough evidence. So then he appointed Lindsey Halligan for the sole purpose of prosecuting his enemies, James Comey and Letitia James. And so now you have the prospect of these cases being thrown out because of vindictive prosecution. And that's where the president needs to be careful, because when you directly order your prosecutors to prosecute your enemies, you're going to get a vindictive prosecution case. But when did that happen?
So we've got the E. Jean Carroll case, where they created a law specifically to allow just her to file a civil action.
But that's the state of New York. That's
Indeed.
not feds.
Indeed.
Right.
Well, the argument is the Democratic Party is not just a federal organization or a state organization. They're, in fact, both, and their leadership operates across the board, state and federal, and city and local and otherwise. But also you had the feds raided Trump's home. You had...
Well, they had a warrant for that.
Sure. And then you've got the prosecution of Trump for documents where they actually staged photos and put cover sheets on documents they pulled from boxes. And then Joe Biden, who actually explicitly was found to have retained national security information for the purpose of making money, was not charged because they said, we couldn't convict him anyway. The American people aren't going to tolerate it. Whatever your argument's going to be for the legal reasons, the American people see a story of Joe Biden withholding documents at multiple locations and them saying we can't charge him, and Donald Trump, them raiding his home and saying, but him we can. The distinction in the minutia of like the granular legalese as to why it makes sense or doesn't matter in a partisan environment like we have right now. You can't do it. And that's why historically we've not seen a political party or political actors go after their top level rivals, like raiding the frontrunner's home in any way. It's nuts, even if they did do something wrong.
Well, I'd have to...
Bolton too.
Bolton is a different matter. Bolton, I actually do think they have legitimate facts there. That's going to be tainted by the politicized prosecutions of Letitia James and James Comey, though. It feeds into that, even though Bolton looks like that may be a legitimate case. As far as raiding his home, I have to push back on the term raiding because when they went in, first they got a search warrant signed by a federal magistrate showing there's probable cause that evidence of a crime existed in Mar-a-Lago. And then they didn't raid it. They went in there unarmed. They gave Secret Service a call in advance. They went in there with plain clothes and they searched the place and they recovered the documents that Trump and his lawyers said they didn't have. And so that was done the proper way. And then it went down. Jack Smith could have filed that case in Washington, D.C. That would have been so much better for him politically because you have the liberal Washington, D.C. jury pool. You have the judges who are a lot more favorable. But instead, he filed it in South Florida where he knew that Aileen Cannon, the Trump appointed judge, would be there and would possibly get the case. And that was the beginning of the end for him.
It seems like there's always some unfortunate legal reason why they're not going to go after the Democrats on these issues.
How so?
Well, like the Biden being the easiest example. We can look at the general unprecedented nature of, like I mentioned, the E. Jean Carroll case, where you're familiar. They created a law. They passed a law saying we're going to allow people to resurrect claims beyond the statute of limitations. It was used just for Trump. Highly dubious story. Or you also have the civil fraud case, where with Trump, they claim he defrauded because he had, documents misstated the size of his penthouse from 10,000 to 30,000, even though the financial paperwork submitted had the disclaimer, you must do your due diligence, the numbers may be inaccurate, as all financial paperwork does. And Deutsche Bank even said we weren't defrauded. So they launch all of these things, and then we're told there's actually no legal mechanism by which we can find accountability for these unjust actions.
I want to give you credit for the New York case. I want to say that one is something that I think a lot of people are now saying that was unduly politicized. That was the Alvin Bragg case.
The civil fraud.
The New York, there's
34 felonies, civil fraud, and E. Jean Carroll.
The 34 felonies.
They were all New York.
Yeah, that one, I mean, first off, Alvin Bragg and Letitia James both campaigned on going after Donald Trump.
Yep.
They both said, you should never have done that. So I grant you that. And I think that in retrospect, that the New York case seemed to be a case where the DA was trying to find something there, and they resurrected this 34-count case. And I think that looked bad, and that was the first case against Donald Trump. That was not the Biden Justice Department, but that was Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor, making that decision. And I got to say, it's been my experience that when you're an independently elected district attorney, you're not getting calls from the White House to do things, because if that happened, I would have gotten calls because I had Mar-a-Lago in my jurisdiction. I never got a call from them and never even got invited to a Hanukkah party. But as far as the E. Jean Carroll case, that law that was passed in New York was not for Trump. That was done for sexual assault survivors. It was used against Harvey Weinstein. It was used against a lot of rich, powerful men. Trump did get caught up in it, and that statute was used against him. And it was interesting about that. That's how I first found out about you, Tim, and this podcast, because the jury selection. You remember when the jury?
That's right. They said they watched my show.
That was unbelievable. One guy did. Yeah.
To be fair, he said he's seen an episode of it or something like that. And then they tried claiming that he was a fan, but he just saw an episode one time or something.
The lawyers for E. Jean Carroll said you must remove this person from the jury because he watches Tim Pool podcast, and Tim Pool had talked about how bogus these cases were, and so the judge said, no, we're going to keep him on the jury, and then he ruled away with the rest of the
because he wasn't really a viewer of the show, right? When you looked at what he had actually said, it's like I had something to the effect of like he had seen episodes of my podcast, but it wasn't like he was a regular viewer or anything.
I thought actually it was a sign of America's strength that you have people who watch your show and then decide as a member of the jury they're just going to follow the evidence and the law in front of them and then rule the way they did.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.